This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
We're back with another episode of what we have decided to call Iron and Myth. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, and joining me via Skype with video this time, all of us looking a little scruffy because it's the weekend, and that's how we roll. Fellas who share an interest in the divine council worldview and trying to better understand what exactly is going on in the supernatural realm. A pastor, an archaeologist, and friends. Doug Van Dorn, Judd Burton, thanks for weighing in tonight.
Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Doug, let's start with you because you made the news this week. It's very exciting to see that.
That was a surprise. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, the Jerusalem Post and a number of other major news outlets picked up on the news of an upcoming series, a documentary series on the Nephilim, coming from the Inspiration Network. And you were mentioned in the articles by the producer. And so not only talking about the Nephilim, but they did filming at Gilgal Refaim and also at that Serpent Mound. And again, props to you for being the first to spot that, the Serpent Mound of Bashan. So tell us about the project. When can we see this?
You know, you went out there, 2 years ago or something like that?
Yeah, we were
to the Serpent Mound.
Right, except we didn't know it was there. We didn't realize we had driven so close.
That's right. Yeah, you were talking about it when you came back. And when I saw that you were there, I was jealous. And I got this phone call in March of 2019, it was. And this guy had been calling me over and over on my home phone, which I hardly ever answer because it's usually spam. Well, I get this call at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm like, that's probably somebody from church. I better answer it. So I pick it up, and this guy who says, "Hey, is this Doug Van Dorn?" Yeah. And I sounded terrible. And he goes, "Hey, man, I'm a movie producer, and I want to make a movie with you and talk about the Giants." And I'm like, "What? Who is this?" You know? I said, "Man, I'm not feeling very good. I'm sick today." And it was just a really bizarre conversation. And next thing you know, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was later. I'm on the East Coast." And so next thing you know, I have this guy over to my house. He flew out like within a week, and we filmed a little segment for this movie that he was making on. At that time, it was just on the Nephilim. And I don't know how it happened. I think he said that he had just finished another project and he wanted to start doing something new and didn't know what to do. And his CEO or whatever there at the corporation pulls a book from behind him. He says, "You should do this," and he pulls out my book on giants. And so that's how they ended up coming to know who I was. And after we did that interview, he said, "Man, I'd really like to have you come to Israel. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing? So I'll pay for the whole thing and whatever." And so 2 months later, we're in Israel and I'm standing on the Serpent Mound, and it was absolutely surreal. I could not believe that whole thing. It was just it was a very kind providence of God. I was not expecting it.
So is that where you took the picture of the megalithic tomb that you were standing on that you shared with me a couple of years ago?
Probably. Yeah, it could be that. They did some drone footage of the mound, and I have that up on my Facebook page, kind of as the background. And so that comes right from their show. And so they finished the show, I think it was last summer. You know, COVID really slowed them down in their production and stuff. And they've been shopping it around since. So people want to know when it's going to come out. I've seen the whole thing. It's completely finished. They're just shopping it and trying to figure out if anybody will take it. And I know somebody will. It's very, very well done. And just good guys over there.
Well, I know that Tom Horn is real interested in it, and that's why he's probably got multiple employees of Skywatch, including me, reaching out. I hadn't realized that the producer had already been contacted by one of the other guys on staff when I reached out to you the other day after we saw that news item. But Tom shared it with me and with like 4 other people on staff. Hey, look at this. It's like, wow, well, that's cool.
Right. That's how I found out about the piece. And it ends up being a guy named Adam who, this guy lives 10 miles from the mound and from the wheel, and he had never been there in his life. And he's just kind of this reclusive guy who just writes crazy articles and stuff like that. And we took him over there, and it was a pretty funny thing. And I think that was the most time we spent with him. And then he ended up, I think he contacted Rudy to see if he would like to have he's written up, and Rudy said, sure, go ahead and do it. And
I think this Adam is one of the regular staff writers for Israel 365 News.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
regularly
right.
writes on news in that area, but always with a biblical and specifically a Jewish perspective. But that is interesting that he's been so close and he's never seen it. But, then...
But literally 10 miles. He lives at kind of the base of the top northwest part of Sea of Galilee. Okay,
all right. So we did a previous program, and I'll put that link in the show notes on the Serpent Mound of Bashan after we found it. And again, it was I just stumbled on it the same way you did, looking at Google Earth. I was trying to find with the direction of the gates in Gilgal Refaim. It's like, oh, hey, Sharon, come look at this. And I thought, this is
Right.
This is so obvious that somebody somewhere must have noticed this and written something about it. And the only one I could find who'd ever written anything about it was you in your book, Giants, Sons of the Gods. So
Right.
What was the reaction of the team when they saw this thing and they got up on the back of it?
We were there. Rudy had known about it, but he didn't understand, I don't think, the scope of it. And so he had somebody bring a drone along, and we filmed that. We were doing most of the production stuff on the wheel, and then he had the drone fly over, and it wasn't until later when he got the footage back, I think probably later that night, he looked at it and goes, oh, wow, that's crazy. There's something there. And so we didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. And he subsequently is doing a TV series following up on the movie, the 4-part documentary. And so we filmed an entire episode on the mound, and Judd did some stuff with that with us on Skype. And so there'll be more to come with it. Very
cool. Now, Judd, we talked about this before for people who haven't heard that program. What's the significance of that thing, that Serpent Mound? I know that some of the archaeologists who've written about it have just sort of written it off as a random basalt that was ejected from an ancient volcano that happened to cool in this really weird shape. But, how do you explain the 140 megalithic tombs on the back?
Right. There's certainly that. There's the significance of the region that we've talked about innumerable times on the show. Its proximity to Gilgal Refaim and the significance of the snake and egg symbology, or rather, in this case, the articulated snake and the Ouroboros. If you view the Gilgal Refaim as a sort of stylized Ouroboros, and the fact that it's called Bashan, the land of the serpent, Vashawn. That's what that literally means. Plus, Doug's astronomical work on some of the alignments is just jaw-droppingly. Here I am struggling for words to describe it. For the times that he's told me that he's got new alignment information, and it's just staggering stuff that we think deals directly with the time of the Watchers. One of the particular alignments.
So
what was that, Doug?
I think Doug has been muted. We can't hear you, Doug. There you go.
Oh, sorry. I said, going back to the time of Göbekli Tepe.
Yes, right smack dab in the Mesolithic.
Now, that's really interesting. I've read what little there is on the excavations there at Gilgal Refaim. And one of the most recent digs, which was about 10 years ago, they did optically stimulated luminescence on what they believed was undisturbed soil from the central core, and dated the construction of the central core to about 3750 BC. But they found an outer ring that's been dismantled around the outside that was apparently even bigger, and they only excavated part of it. They didn't see how big around, but presumably it was another circle or another ring around it where the stones have been dismantled to create Gilgal Refaim as we see it now. So they may have preserved older alignments when they rebuilt it.
Yes, I think that's certainly plausible, and with the stuff that Doug's done in that regard, I think it's demonstrable too.
So is this the paper that you guys have been working on that you guys are trying to get published?
Yes.
So can you tell us what's in it, or do we have to wait until it gets peer reviewed?
We probably have to have a committee meeting before we talk about what else. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with talking about, just the basic new findings.
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, the idea is I've been thinking about the Great Year and the 26,000 year, approximately cycle, and how the North Pole changes star locations. So right now it's in what we call the North Star Polaris, but it hasn't always been in the North Star. And I think I had just been finishing up some stuff in Revelation, thinking about this, and I pulled out the map of the Serpent Mound, and I found a website that will do kind of solstice stuff and where the sun's rising, and you can overlay whatever you want to on top of it. So I did that, and I found out that it seems to be oriented exactly where the alignment of the solstice, summer solstice, would be. Then I got to wondering, is there a way you could figure out maybe if there was a time that it was either built or that it was maybe hearkening back to? And so nothing showed up for the North Star Polaris that we have today. Nothing showed up, in recent past. But it's really crazy because if you go back essentially to Göbekli Tepe time when Vega is the North Star, you overlay the star chart with that, what you find is that from the dead center of the wheel, going through kind of the heart of the serpent, you find that Vega is literally dead over the top of Mount Hermon. So,
oh, wow. That is really interesting. So I was going to suggest, Alpha Draconis, but that's still like 5,000 years later. I mean, more recent than the time you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So Vega takes us back halfway through the Great Year, which is the kind of the 13,000 years or whatever, right back to that same period of time.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you're, anybody who's read any Graham Hancock stuff, he points back to that same kind of period when he thinks that the cataclysm was that destroyed all these civilizations and put them under the oceans, and I think him and Bouval date the pyramid or the Sphinx to that period of time. So yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff going on at that time that would be contemporary to it. So whether or not they built it, at that time, or they were just building around it to commemorate that, we don't really speculate on that. But there does seem to be something pretty significant about that date with that site.
So the time frame takes us back to contemporary with Göbekli Tepe and some sort of cataclysm. Because I remember reading recently, there was a paper on Göbekli Tepe that argues that the images on those T-shaped pillars seem to indicate some sort of cataclysm. What, in the vicinity of 12,500 BC, or am I not remembering it right?
I don't know that I've read that paper, but I think the cataclysm is probably the Younger Driest event.
Okay.
If I were trying to pin something down.
And I know that we've talked about that before, but for viewers or listeners who've never heard of the Younger Driest event, what is that?
That's a series of cataclysms that comes along or about 9,500 BC or thereabouts, brought on by the changing water levels sea levels coming off of the last ice age, and you've got a lot of weird mass coronal ejection activity hitting the planet, and you've got periods of long torrential rain, and then you've got periods of flash freezing, and it just sort of flip-flops there for a while, and it drastically reshapes the topography of the continents into what they would more look like, in the modern period. But it heralded the die-off of a lot of the megafauna, take that in conjunction with the overhunting, which I think was largely at the hands of the Nephilim, to be quite honest. There's the third agency hypothesis about, there was some unknown factor that contributed to the demise of the megafauna. Well, it wasn't just, I don't think it necessarily has to be unknown when you consider the caloric intake that these things would have needed to sustain themselves. At any rate, the Younger Driest event gives us a kind of a geological possibility, I think, in placing the Noahic flood, and also to the same cataclysm that destroys any of the antediluvian civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, all of those.
I guess the question for people who know that we're three Christians is, how do we as Christians process this? Because it sounds like, especially when you start bringing in names like Graham Hancock, and I appreciate his work,
right.
But we start getting into what a lot of people would call pseudo-archaeology or New Age archaeology. So how do we process this as Christians?
Well, I think you just have to be really selective. I'm not a big fan of Hancock's recent work and kind of the direction he's taken with it, thinking that the high civilization of prehistory was due to our ingestion of hallucinogens, on the level.
Oh yeah.
But his earlier work is very reasoned, and it's not divorced from interfacing with archaeological sources and papers and things like that. So he's not, and he's really not the only avocational, who is writing on those lines. There's several others, but the problem is that a lot of them are involved in the New Age, and they mix a lot of that kind of stuff in it. But you have to give it up to people like Hancock, because for the longest time, he gave human agency to what was happening in this prehistoric period. Maybe humans that we're not familiar with, I think, was kind of the gist that he was getting at. But
and he's really been coming back to that in his last couple of books, actually.
And so at the end of the day, I think people just have to be kind of discerning about what they read, because some of these guys do have some interesting insight to add. I think Andrew Collins, to a degree, does some interesting work. I don't know why he insists on conflating the Nephilim and the Watchers to this, but just in terms of gathering lots of interesting ethnographic and folkloric information, he's really good at that kind of thing.
Yeah, I look at it this way, Derek. I don't mean this in a bad way, but in some ways it's kind of the enemy of my enemy. And if Darwinism is kind of the great enemy of Christianity in the modern world, these are some guys who are not even believers, who are really hard against that kind of a worldview. And so they're bringing some things to bear that I think are important for Christians to listen to, that I think they can listen to. Now, not everything they say is right, and I'm completely with Judd when Hancock started going off on, I think he called that book Talisman or something like that, and he was smoking the ayahuasca, and I mean that's right up the occult. I mean that's straight up occult stuff. And Christians need to use discernment, and even with like his map of Antarctica, the old Piri Reis map, and those kinds of things. We did a show on paranormal with Dr. Heiser, kind of showing how it's pretty easy to debunk that map at this point in time. So it's not that everything that he says is true, but to me, it's the willingness of some of these guys to counter the entrenched scientific narrative of the current age, to be able to get people thinking about things that are, at least in some directions, are more biblical. And, when you think about the age of the Younger Driest, or, you have people who are young Earth and old Earth that are Christians, and everybody has to work through that themselves. But It's not an endorsement for me to say, Graham Hancock this, to say that I love the guy or whatever. It's just he's somebody who is kind of the enemy of my enemy. Mm-hmm. I think that it's been helpful for me to read his stuff in that way.
So how do we then fit this into the biblical narrative of history? I mean, where would this fit, say, in the early chapters of Genesis?
Well, are you talking about the flood period?
Yeah. Well, how do we explain what happened at Göbekli Tepe, and assuming that what was built at Gilgal Refaim was contemporary with that? Who were those people, and why were they doing what they were doing? Can we speculate on that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely informed speculation that we can provide. I mean, clearly, with the serpent symbology here, I think the agency is pretty clear. It's the Watcher era angels that are doing this and probably utilizing their progeny, to do it. But there are these monuments that date to this period, in not just the ancient Near East, but all over the world, that form evidence of a kind of confederacy, if you will. And that's really how I've always looked at Atlantis for a long time, is that it's not just one island. That might have been the capital in the Atlantic, but it was a confederacy of these high civilizations that existed in late prehistory. But in terms of the agency of the monuments we're talking about, yeah, we're definitely talking about Watcher tech. And I've spoken on the Göbekli Tepe end of that, as Göbekli Tepe being so near to the crucial events in Genesis, like in Eden and the expulsion from the garden, and the potentiality for a kind of Tower of Babel weaponization of Eden in order to retake heaven. Seems to be a pretty real possibility, I think, in the machinations of the Watchers of that period.
How do you answer your own question, Derek?
Well, I'm still trying to parse through that and figure that out. I would probably follow.
You've done a lot of work on Watchers and stuff like that, and the gods, and certainly pre-flood and post-flood. So you obviously have a way of fitting that into your worldview. Yeah,
I would see. I had been operating under the assumption that Gilgal Refaim, the wheel, was post-flood, early on in the Uruk period, which is the kingdom of Nimrod. According to the archaeologist who did the most recent dig there, Dr. Michael Freakman, it was probably abandoned toward the end of the Uruk period, somewhere around 3100 BC, if I'm remembering the paper correctly. But your work suggests that they were preserving something much, much older. And again, Freakman's dig hinted at that when they found this outer ring that they partly excavated. They only got a little bit of it and found that it had been dismantled to create Gilgal Refaim. Certainly the summer solstice seems to have been very important to them, because they found that there's a chamber on the top, and you've been there, so you've seen that hole that peers in through the top, and on the solstice, it shines in on what he called a threshold stone, but that sure looks like the top slab of a dolmen to me. When you go into the central core there, the inner core, it looks like all of this was built around and above a dolmen. So, who was there? Why was this built where it was, within plain sight of Mount Hermon, which is about 20 miles north of there? And then why? And again, we're just kicking ourselves because we've gone back and looked at the video that we shot while we were out there visiting Gilgal that day. It's like, look, there's like a 3-second shot of the mound as we're driving past, because everybody's looking out the other side of the Jeep at, look, Gilgal Refaim's over there. Oh, there's a hill over here. Okay. We could have thrown a rock and hit that thing, but we didn't know what it was. And we actually had airfare to go back to Israel in March of 2020 or April of 2020. We were going to go there and shoot our own little documentary, and we got, of course, travel got shut down, so we haven't been back since. But I would suggest that they were trying to build some kind of a portal, or what they believed would be a portal, like the Tower of Babel, to reconnect the realm of men, humanity, with the realm of the gods who were sent away by the flood. Because there's a long history in the ancient world of having to cross a body of water to get to the realm of the dead. This is something that turned up in my research for the book, The Second Coming of Saturn, with the Hurrians and their necromantic ritual pit called the Abi. And what was really fascinating was, as I dug deeper into that and found that there's etymological connections between that word in ancient Hurrian to the Sumerian Abzu, the Akkadian Apsu, and the Hebrew word Ov, as in the Ov of Endor, the medium of Endor. Mm-hmm. The New English translators actually render that section of 2 Samuel 18, where Saul goes to visit her, instead of calling her the medium or the witch of Endor, they call her the owner of the ritual pit. Because
the owner of the ritual pit. Now,
yeah,
that's interesting.
Because that appears to be what the word meant when you compare it to its original word, which comes from the Hurrians, not the Sumerians. Apparently, Harry Hoffner, who's a scholar of Hurrian language going back 50 years. I mean, he's a professor emeritus now. In fact, I'm not certain he's still with us, but in 1966, he wrote that the original of the word Abzu, Abzu did not lead to the Hurrian word. The Hurrian word came before the Sumerian word.
Wow. So he's arguing that. Now, that's interesting. I know nothing about the way that Hurrian behaves as a language, but I would be interested to see if it at all has any Proto-Indo-European connections.
Yeah.
Did you find anything like that?
I didn't dig much into the Proto-Indo-European. As far as I was concerned, the Hurrians were as far as I was going to go. But we did trace the Hurrians back to the Kura Araxes civilization, which emerged from the Ararat Plain in the. And I just found a paper the other day. A scholar who, based on a dig in Azerbaijan, argues that they probably came from the Ararat Plain sometime toward the end of the 5th millennium BC, so 4200 BC, somewhere around there. Yeah. But they spread out from there throughout the outer.
Their forebears scattered all through the Transcaucasus too.
Yes, exactly. And it's not a coincidence that there are all kinds of dolmens up that way through Georgia and up into Russia.
I would love to read that paper.
Hoffner, I'm looking at the book. It's on page 91 of my book. The link between Overeem, Avarim, Ovoth, Avoth, Ov, and the older words in Ugaritic, Hittite, Assyrian, and Sumerian. This is the kind of papers that I read so that you, the viewer, don't have to. May have a common ancestor. Until recently, scholars would have assumed the Sumerian must be the oldest and thus original form of the word, but as early as 1967, long before the discovery of ancient Urkesh, which is the oldest known urban center established by the Hurrians, eminent Hittitologist Harry A. Hoffner argued that it was phonetically impossible for the Hittite word abi from the Hurrian Ayabi, however they pronounce it, to derive from the Sumerian ab. Thus, Hoffner argued it was better, quote, to accept the Hurrian Ayabi as the prototype. In other words, on the basis of texts alone, Hoffner argued that it was the Hurrians, not the Sumerians, who brought to Mesopotamia the concept of a ritual pit to summon gods and spirits from the netherworld. And then when you connect this to these guys to the Kura Araxes people, and this is why I was so excited by your paper, Judd, which we discussed while I was writing the book on the phonemes behind the Eurasian words for royalty and kings, the god kings of old. Because you trace the origin for those phonemes, the little pieces of language behind words like Rex and Roy and Royal, etc., to that same place, that in the Caucasus region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to fit that into whatever the follow up to that report ends up being.
I can send you that that paper from Harry Hoffner. But again, finding that, and again, he wrote that in 1967, and the husband and wife archaeologist team from UCLA, the Bucciolatis, didn't discover Urkesh until about 1989 or 90, and that's where they actually found the Abbey there next to the temple at Urkesh.
Okay.
So
fascinating. I got to get my hands on it.
Yeah. So the Hurrians are a little more important than we've been taught. In fact, Sharon and I kind of rabbit trailed today as we were talking about the book of Judges on our weekly Bible study, Judges 1 and 2, because in that we read that the tribe of Judah took Jerusalem and burned it, but then later in Judges 2, the tribe of Benjamin couldn't dislodge the Jebusites. So apparently the Judahites burned the city, the Jebusites came back and rebuilt it, and the Benjaminites couldn't push them out. And 350 years later, when David took the city of Jebus, the Jebusites were still there, but their leader was, or at least the one who sold him the threshing floor, where David sacrificed to call off the destroyer, the angel of Yahweh, was named Arana, and that's a word that means Lord in Hurrian. So it appears the Hurrians were still there. What's fascinating is, and I put this again in the book, that beneath the spot where it was believed that the threshing, or the altar that David put on the spot of the threshing floor, is a cave that Muslims call the Well of Souls. And there's some drawings from tourist visitors who've seen it like in the 19th century. So it's possible that there was a cave or a pit below the spot where the Dome of the Rock now stands, where I guess there's a mosque down there. But is it possible that the Hurrians took that spot and did what they appear to have done wherever else they've been, which is set up a ritual pit where you go, you descend, you offer sacrifices to the gods of the netherworld, and then, ask them for favors.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
And the relevance, the connection here to this, the pre-flood era, is that one of the things they found at Urkesh, which is a spot in northern Syria called Tel Mozan, was a drain that appears to lead to this area, the Abi. And it's known from a much later Hittite text, which makes reference to a lot. The Hittites preserved a lot of the Hurrian religion. There's a reference to a thing called the rough translation from the Hurrian is divine watercourse. In other words, a stream that connected the world above to the world below. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a cognate with the river Styx.
Yeah, and really, riverways in the midst of all kinds of traditions in the West and also the New World too. And Native Americans believe that riverways, particularly those heading west, were entrances into the land of the dead.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things we speculated on in Revelation, the 4 angels bound in the river Euphrates, and then the army of 200 million cavalry. The Euphrates kind of considered a liminal boundary. So was the Jordan River, though. I mean, 100 years ago, there's a well-known encyclopedia of the Bible, Shane and Black, and they translated the Hebrew word avarim, which is based on that older Hurrian word abi, and the mountains of Avarim, east of the Dead Sea, where Moses got his only look. Mount Nebo was a mountain of the Avarim. It's a word that roughly translates into travelers, as in those that travel or cross over, those on the other side. That was their interpretation of that word, the Avarim. Well, it means those on the other side, as in those mountains on the other side of the Jordan. It seems to me they almost had it right. It's like those on the other side of the veil was what was really in view there. But they, 100 years ago, they didn't have all the archaeology that's been dug up since 1922 when they found the Ras Shamra, the Ugarit tablets, and began to realize, hey, there was a cult of the dead that was really big in the ancient world, really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So one of the things that we said we were going to talk about, let's shift gears and get into this. In the month of February, Jed, you'd floated the idea of discussing a couple of entities that were venerated about this time every year. One of those was Lupercalia, or at least festivals at this time of year. Lupercalia, the Romans.
Yeah.
What was that about, and who was being worshipped, celebrated, venerated at this festival?
Well, the Lupercalia is a Roman festival. It's on their calendar. It's February the 15th. And we're pretty certain that there's really not a whole lot of debate about it at this point in the scholarly community. The god that was worshipped here was Pan, because it was a festival of animal husbandry, in which all the ritual and parading and things like that were done to keep the flock safe, essentially. Not just from interestingly enough, not just from your run-of-the-mill predators that you would expect to find, wolves and bears and big cats, those kinds of things. You still had to deal with things like the West Asian lion, which was still a thing in the ancient world. But there were also rituals to keep out more supernaturally tinged creatures, such as these werewolf creatures that were thought to plague the flocks of people living throughout the Mediterranean basin. But the Lupercalia, just in general, in all of its weirdness, it is a strange kind of a festival. Is a festival that honors Pan, and we know that it was a big festival in all of Pan's centers, all of his worship centers throughout the Greco-Roman world, which would have included notably Peneus, because that was the very rationale for that side, as far as the Ptolemies and the Seleucids were concerned, when they set the shrine up there around just before 200 BC. But I began to wonder about, not just because of the time of the year, but because it's never that far out of my radar. Is there something about the timing? Because I've spent so much time on the sacred space issues, the sacred geography issues in the history of Peneus. The temporal stuff has sort of taken a back seat. And for decades, scholars have put their best foot out and said that, well, Jesus likely visited Caesarea Philippi in the winter before his death, and it was never any more specific than that. And I thought, well, I wonder if we're missing clues that might give us some insight into, maybe narrowing that window down a little bit. And it just sort of dawned on me. I couldn't believe that I'd never thought of it before, that the Lupercalia might offer some answers, because in light of everything else that Jesus was doing at Caesarea Philippi, with all of the cultural and supernatural significance of the area that he was in, it makes sense that if he's firing a shot over the enemy's bow, that by arriving, in essence, crashing Pan's party, by arriving at that time, he's really drumming old Pan over the nose, and of course, going through the line of his personalities and identities, Azazel. And we know that it was that the Lupercalia did in fact happen at Peneus, at Caesarea Philippi. We have records, little epigrams here and there in the inscription evidence of the kinds of rituals that you would expect, votive offerings and the this kind of tumultuous parade where the young maidens of the town would line up, and bare their thigh, and the Lupercal, who were these young men that were basically dressed up like Pan. They were dressed up in goat skins, would come by and gently slap the thighs of these maidens. This was to ensure fertility for not only humans but also for the flocks. So we know that those kind of festivals did go on. Those kinds of rituals did go on. From the inscription evidence that we have, and it just sort of like clicked into place to me that this is probably the likeliest time, if we're confining it to the winter, then this would be the time in the winter that it would make the most sense, given what we already know about Jesus and his mission to Peneus. And I've spoken about this a number of occasions before. I do have plans to do a paper. I just can't do it right now because I've got other things on my plate. But I do have that all outlined out, and I've discussed it on a number of occasions as well. But that leaves you with about 6 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks before Easter rolls around. So it's not, if Lupercalia is the date, and let's say that they were there, heck, they may have been there in January, or they may have been there, all the month of February, because that entire month of February was kind of an extended Lupercalia. And then you've got time for the Transfiguration event, and then the journey back down to Jerusalem. And so the more and more I've thought about it, the more, it's just sort of a logical method of looking at potential timings of Jesus' arrival there, given what we know about why he went there in the first place.
It's interesting that this also coincides with another Roman festival called Februus.
Februus. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who was a god that was supposed to be a purifier, but worshipped under the same name by their neighboring Etruscans as the god of the underworld, and roughly equated with the Roman god Pluto.
Mm-hmm.
But given the underworld connections with Bashan and Peneus, it wouldn't be surprising if there was a connection there too.
No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I'd have to look at the rest of the month's festivals, but that would not be out of character at all. I mean, Pan was he was a chthonic sort of deity anyway, so it would make sense.
Somebody had forwarded to me something else that was interesting. February 23rd, which we just passed, was a date that was celebrated in Rome for the god Terminus, who was the god of liminal god, who guarded boundaries. And apparently, I had missed this when I was doing research on the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, which is the temple on top of Mons, or it used to be Mons Saturnus, but the temple of Saturn got kind of pushed off down to the bottom of the hill when he was demoted to the netherworld, apparently. The Capitoline Hill was the site where the last king of Rome, Tarquin the Proud, built this temple to Jupiter. Apparently, there were a number of altars there for other deities, and the augurs had to check with all of the gods that were being displaced to see if they were okay with being moved for Jupiter, the king of their pantheon. And apparently, Terminus was the one who was not okay with being moved. And so when they built the temple to Jupiter, apparently they had to build it around the altar stone for Terminus, and they had to leave a hole in the roof of the temple because Terminus was always worshipped out in the open. And what's interesting about this, I see we've lost the connection. Well, we're still recording on this side, so we'll keep talking until we reconnect with those fellows. So we're back. We're recording again. Anyway, I was in the middle of saying the thing that was interesting about having to build the temple around that altar of the god Terminus, because he didn't want to be moved, is that it required a hole to be left in the roof of the temple of Jupiter, just like and the United States Capitol, which is named the Capitol because that was the name of the temple of Jupiter, the Capitolium, likewise has an oculus through which people in the rotunda see the apotheosis of Washington. I don't know if there's a connection there, if that inspired the oculus inside the United States Capitol. I assume that it was inspired by the oculus in the Pantheon in Rome, but who knows? More research required.
It's entirely plausible.
So is there any kind of connection between, you brought up werewolves as part of this festival, and then also Pan, who's the goat satyr. Is there any kind of connection between those two kind of creatures?
Well, insofar as that they're chimeric,
Yeah.
they both have animal traits and human traits. So they would seem to be templates that were lifted right off of the Enoch narrative that were given about the Watchers sinning against the flesh of birds and animals and reptiles and things like that.
We do find them both in the Septuagint in Isaiah, either 13 or 34, right there together. The satyrs and the howlings. Some of the translations have of these creatures that are going to haunt the deserts of Babylon and Edom after God's punishment and judgment of them.
Yeah, hyenas will cry in its towers and jackals in the pleasant places.
Something like that. Yeah, the ESV is completely naturalized. There's just all animals. And then you go and you read the Hebrew and you read the Greek, and you come away with a little bit different story than that. And then when you read the inspired commentary on it, which is short, which is Revelation 18:2, and John is talking about Babylon being the haunt of demons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where is he getting that from? He's not getting that from the ESV translation. I can tell you that. He's getting it from the text.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Lexham English Septuagint, which is a more modern Septuagint translation. Isaiah 13:21. Wild animals will rest there, and the houses will be filled with sound, and sirens will rest there, and divine beings will dance there, divine beings, and donkey centaurs will settle there.
Right.
And hedgehogs will make dens among their houses.
Donkey centaurs. There you go.
Yeah, the ESV. Wild animals will lie down there. Their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. So, Jed, the Se'irim. How do we interpret that? I mean, that's based on the Hebrew word for hairy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, traditionally those are the satyr-like goat demons of Jewish tradition. I think Doug pointed out that most of our translations of these passages have just been thoroughly naturalized.
Mm-hmm.
Even when the names of these entities are written out, in the language that the book is written in. Clearly, even outside of the Serim, you've got a whole host of goat deities and goat gods that existed, goat demons that existed in ancient Near Eastern thought. So much so that it's hard to make a case for not just Pan, but for lots of Greek gods having their origins in Greece proper. And this brings us sort of back to the study of Orientalizing in Greek culture, and also works like the East Face of the Helicon that all talk about the tremendous mythological influence the ancient Near East had on the Greek world. because so many of them believe that their gods did come from the east. And the more you dip your foot into this sort of material, the easier it is for, I think, to not just believe that, but to just see it and confirm it, from the text.
You guys, I think there's a wordplay that's going on with the Serim, and I forget which language it is. Genesis talks about Edom is also called Seir.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Esau is hairy. And so he comes from that area. And then you have these Horites, which are one of the Nephilim or Refaim tribes in Genesis 14 and other places, kind of these cave-dwelling, troglodyte creatures, whatever they were. And then you go over to the book of Jasher, or whatever you want to make of that thing, and you find Esau killing this like hairy monster creature, coming right out of that same area. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's related to that word Serim that the Bible's at the very least playing on, and it probably has a lot of connection to that particular region.
Well, something we can get, I think, a lot of times is that when we read those passages, we're automatically reading them out of context, unless we have lots of aids, with us that can show us the context. For an ancient audience, they wouldn't need it. They would understand the connections already because they're built into their culture.
It's interesting, and this is one reason we look at the Septuagint just as a matter of course anymore, that
right.
The wild goats in the ESV are the divine beings in the Septuagint. So clearly the Jewish religious scholars 200 years before mm-hmm. Jesus understood what was really being said there.
Right.
It's there's something about that region south of in the Negev, because if I'm remembering correctly, Isaiah prophesies about that region in the Negev. I'm going to have to look this up here while we're kind of try to catch this on the fly. But there's something about the Negev that is kind of ringing a bell in my memory. By the way, the word translated jackals in the ESV is tenim. Isn't that the same root word behind serpent or dragon?
Yes, I think it is. The T sound, N sound. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean that's the second morpheme that makes up the word baton.
Mm-hmm.
Bashawn.
Yeah, the Tanakh has dragons for that one.
Okay.
It's interesting. The Septuagint actually has the same exact word as it has for what one of the translations has is the howling. I think that might be what the one is that you're talking the divine beings, but it's the word ekos in Greek. So it's actually translating two Hebrew words with the same Greek word. But in either case, you have some pretty weird creatures that are coming up in the way that they're talking about it. What is a howling?
Isaiah 30 verse 6 is what I was trying to think of. An oracle on the beasts of the Negev. Through a land of trouble and anguish, from where come the lioness and the lion, the adder and the flying fiery serpent. They carry their riches on the backs of donkeys, their treasures on the humps of camels, to a people that cannot profit them. The flying fiery serpent.
Yeah, those guys show up in Isaiah 14, I think, at the end of it.
Correct.
So that's that whole long passage of where we get Lucifer from. At the beginning of it, you have the Rephaim showing up, and at the end, you have the flying serpents showing up.
Mm-hmm.
The things that you read in your English Bible that you never know until you start studying. It's pretty crazy.
Isaiah 14 is a chapter that Sharon and I are probably going to do a whole book on that chapter sometime. There's a lot in there. I actually, in my latest book, argue that Isaiah 14 is not talking about Satan. That it's a different.
We were talking about that. That would be interesting to hear people. I think for people to hear.
Yeah, it's we could do a whole program on that at some point, and Sharon and I have. So I don't want to, at this point in this program, go down that rabbit trail too far. But I just don't think when you're got all the underworld connections that you see in Isaiah 14, when you look at the way the Satan, Ha-Satan, is described elsewhere in the Old Testament, there's never an underworld connection with Satan. So I think that the entity in view in Isaiah 14 is the one called Saturn, Kronos, Baal-Hamon, who I argue is Shemiyaza, the leader of the Watchers' Rebellion on Mount Hermon. Put that out there on the internet. Put that out there on the internet. Well, I thought so, but it's one of those things where people, no, his name is Lucifer. It's like, no.
Well, I would push back for those folks a little bit without having studied what you're talking about, Derek. But I know that Brian takes the same view as you. We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, so I'm really interested in more of it. But to me, the reference to the underworld there is more metaphorical, and I liken it to the same idea of you will eat the dust of the ground in Genesis 3, that it's a bringing low of the creature that was made high. And you find the same parallel in Ezekiel. I think you find it in 28. You probably find it in 20 or 31, where he's talking about the trees of Eden. You find it in Obadiah. So there's this idea of a high creature being made low. So whether or not it's just purely metaphorical, if you kept it on that level, that's why I've kind of always been comfortable saying, yeah, I'm fine with this being the serpent of the garden. Mm-hmm. But of course, he was called different names by the Jews. Like, they weren't in agreement of who that guy was.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Mastema or Belial or whatever. Ryan Pitterson, in his most recent book, The Final Nephilim, takes a very similar tack and argues that the character that he calls the Assyrian is the one that's in view. And that's one of the things that started me down this line, because Asher was another one of the names worn by this same entity. Enlil, Asher, Dagon, El, Kronos, Saturn, same entity by different names. But when you look at the Old Testament, this is kind of weird. Whenever you see the phrase translated the Assyrian, the Hebrew definite article ha is never used. It's not the Assyrian, it's Asher. So why do translators put the definite article in there? I mean, if you know that you're speaking to an individual rather than to Asher, meaning the nation Assyria, why did the translators put the Assyrian instead of just, oh, okay, this is a reference to Asher, the chief god of the Assyrians? And how many other little choices have been made to de-supernaturalize the Bible? I mean, I know there's a danger in going too far in that direction. It's like, okay, I've got a pet theory and I'm going to write a book on it, so I'm just going to, find this everywhere I can with my Bible software here. But it's true. When you see the Assyrian, which others have argued is the Antichrist or a prophecy of the Antichrist in Micah chapter 5, but he's mentioned in Isaiah 14, that same chapter, where you see, I will break the Assyrian in my land, verse 25, and on my mountains trample him underfoot. But it's not Ha-Ashur, it's just Ashur. The Assyrians would have made it a lot easier for us to understand if they'd given their chief deity a different name. Yeah.
Well, why not name yourself after him, I guess?
Yeah, it's also the name of their capital city. So, what?
Yeah.
Context. Well, let's kind of bring this to a conclusion, because we could the three of us with enough liquid refreshment, we could probably go all night. But Doug, do you have an idea? Do you know yet when first of all, the name of the series, the 4-part documentary series about Gilgal Refaim, the Nephilim, and the Serpent Mound of Bashan? Do you know a name? And I understand the Inspiration Network is looking at broadcasting it, but do you have any idea as far as a time frame?
I don't remember if they're calling it Gods and Giants or like Watchers and Nephilim, or it's going to be along those lines. So it was originally just about the Nephilim, and then they came to understand that this is a much bigger topic than that. So that's the idea of it. 4-part show, and we had all hoped it would already be picked up by somebody. So last I heard, and I think even the article said something about hopefully this fall. Who knows? Maybe this summer. I know that as soon as they get it picked up, they want to put it out. So hopefully it'll be soon.
Are there plans for DVDs? Do you know, or streaming on the web?
Good question. I think that they will have streaming for sure. I've had people ask me about DVDs, and I keep forgetting to ask Rudy if they're going to do that. So I'll have to make sure I ask him that.
Doug Van Dorn should be the world's foremost expert on
DVDs anymore. You're in that biz. Do people make the DVDs anymore, or is that just something that no, nobody does that?
we get those questions occasionally, especially from people overseas. Younger people who follow Skywatch TV are saying, "Why aren't you putting these on thumb drives now?" Nobody's got DVD players anymore. Well, yeah, okay, us old people do. So,
yeah.
Judd, what do you have in the works?
Most of what I've been doing lately is teaching. I've got a few irons in the fire that I'll let it stay in the fire for right now. But suffice to say, people are always welcome to take coursework with me, and that's taken up a lot of my time lately.
Okay, BurtonBeyond.com and TIOBA.org, the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. Doug, your website?
Well, I think it's Douglas Van Dorn now, because I lost the naming rights to my dumb website a year ago. So DouglasVanDorn.com, and our church is rbcnc.com. That's where we have all of our sermons, and I have an awful lot of sermons that are up there. And if you can name a passage that I've preached on that's supernatural, then I've probably dealt with some of this stuff. So there's some pretty good information for people that they can grab onto there.
Very cool. And Doug's also got his books up there. We talked previously about your book, Conspiracy Theory, which was a couple of years ago, which was very timely, hitting when it did. And your even newer book than the new book, The Angel of the Lord, a biblical, historical, and theological study. Again, that's really important too, because when the doctrine of the Trinity comes into question, you got to go back and say, okay, who do you think the angel of the Lord was in the Old Testament?
I would love to have us have a whole conversation on this together, because to me, he's the one that brings home for Christians this worldview. Because if all these ancients have their gods and they're real and they're over them, well, why wouldn't Israel? And why wouldn't he manifest himself in some way?
Right.
Why wouldn't they understand that? And so Israel's God is unique in that he's both their God, but he's also Yahweh. And so they're having to deal with this plurality in a Godhead the same way that Christians do. And when you can finally wrap your head around the fact that this is what's going on in the Old Testament, it brings the two testaments together into one book the way that they're supposed to be, the way that nothing else that I know of can do.
That's a really good suggestion. Let's kick that around. We're going to do this these conversations on a regular basis as our schedules allow. There'll be kind of a rotating cast of characters coming in and out, some other fellows that we'll invite in as time goes on, I'm sure. But that would be an excellent topic. Who is the angel of Yahweh? And because, again, that's one of those subjects that you throw out there and say, well, look, here in the book of Exodus, the Moses and Aaron and Aaron's sons and the 70 elders of Israel had a meal with God, and they saw him. No, that can't happen, because nobody can look on God and live.
Yeah, you can look at God and live.
Yeah, what do you do with this passage in Exodus then? Oh, that must be something else. Okay, there are some, and I get this. It can be difficult to change your perspective and admit that, okay, maybe I didn't have this theology thing all the way figured out. But it's kind of crucial to understanding biblical theology and why all of this stuff is important. Because if you start desupernaturalizing it, you wind up with a book that's just sort of a life coaching. And there are others
Right.
out there that are that tickle the ears a little bit better than the Bible does. So, Doug Van Dorn and Judd Burton, thank you for your time, guys. Appreciate it.
Always fun. I look forward to hopefully having the other two of us be able to meet together.
Amen.
Be in
Amen.
prayer for Josh and Brian for things going on in their lives.
Amen. Hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did having it. It's basically three nerds just talking about stuff that we find really fascinating, but also important, significant when it comes to biblical theology. And Doug's reference there toward the end of the conversation about Brian and Josh. Brian Godawa and Josh Peck were... we'd meant to have them with us this evening. Both of them are attending to some family matters, so do keep Brian Godawa, Josh Peck in your prayers. And again, we will try to make this a regular feature here on A View from the Bunker, roughly once a month or so, as our schedules will allow. And as you might have surmised if you've been following us for a while, it looks like now that travel is opening up, schedules will be getting tighter as we begin to travel. In fact, got a couple of things to tell you about a new conference at what might be the coolest conference venue ever, and how you can save $20 coming to see us in Dallas in just a couple of weeks. That and more as A View from the Bunker continues. Driving the internet to think since 2009. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're online at vftb.net. That is our global hub for media dominance. On social media, you'll find us at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert. That's D-E-R-E-K, by the way. On Facebook, View from the Bunker. Also, Gab Me, We Get Her Parlor at Derek P. Gilbert, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. By the way, there you'll also find our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, which is online at gilberthouse.org. But if you're using YouTube and you're going to the YouTube channel anyway, you might as well check out those audio Bible studies. Each week, Sharon and I record about an hour of Bible as we go through verse by verse in chronological order. And we just entered the book of Judges, as I mentioned in the program tonight, that we will be probably every bit of 3 years going through the Bible at the rate we go through it. It took us Well, we started back in 2014, and it took us about 5 years to go through the Bible the first time. And for a period of for a while there, we were doing 2 hours a week with the Old Testament and the New Testament each week. And we just don't have enough time with writing projects and other things going on to do that anymore. But anyway, you'll find that also besides gilberthouse.org at youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. The Hear the Watchman Conference, Eyes to See. That's the hat, not just covering up my uncombed hair. It's also because Mike and Jeannie are good friends of ours. Mike Kerr, Jeannie Moore, the Hear the Watchman Ministries, pulling together this conference in Dallas. They say this will be the last big conference that they do. They've been doing these big conferences, and now it seems like there's more of a need for smaller regional conferences that are easier to access, perhaps a little more affordable, less expense on the setup side. Mike and Jeannie have to put out a lot of money to put together a conference at a place like the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center in Dallas. Not only do you have to rent the place, you've got to guarantee so many rooms, and then you've got to pay professional audiovisual guys for it to go well, and that costs a lot of money. They don't make a whole lot on these conferences, enough to live on, but they certainly are not getting rich. So we would love for you to take advantage of this opportunity to get together, though. The Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center can hold about 1,000 for this conference. The last time we were there back in 2020, which was just before they shut down travel, I think we were about 500 or 600. I think a lot of people got scared off at the last minute because COVID was just breaking out and we didn't really know what that virus was about just then. Now we do. And this will be an opportunity to get together as a body and hear for some great people, too. Some of the speakers that'll be in Dallas March 17th through 20th, L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Michael Lake, Coach Dave Daubenmire, Pastor Paul Begley, all of those guys, and Jamie Wallen they're firecrackers. If you can't get fired up after hearing those guys speak, then you need to check your pulse. Pastor Casper McLeod, Dave Hodges of the Common Sense Show, Tom Dunn, who has picked up the ministry of Russ Dizdar, spiritual warfare, basically where the rubber meets the road, where our theological rubber meets the road. Tom Dunn will be there for that. Sheila Zielinski will be there, and we pray that you will be as well. And if you use promo code Gilbert20, Gilbert20, that will save you $20 on the registration. There will be live streaming, so if you cannot be in Dallas, March 17th through 20th, do take advantage of the streaming video option, and you can find all that information at hearthewatchmen.com. Come May, Skywatch TV is launching a new virtual conference, The Unveiling. This will go live on the web May 13th of 2022. All the videos will be available for 90 days. You can find out the total list of speakers, the complete list of speakers, that is, at defenderconference.com. We're still in the process of putting together the sign-up page. That should be live within a day or two. Actually, by the time you see this, it should be online already. So defenderconference.com and then follow the link. But speakers include, of course, Tom Horn, who'll be putting together another jaw-dropping presentation. Dr. Judd Burton, whom you just saw on this program, will be one of the speakers. Pastor Carl Gallups, Colonel David Giamona, David Hevner, Drew Graffia, Dr. Ken Johnson, Dr. Michael Lake, Josh Peck, Dr. Doug Petrovich. If you've not seen the 4 episodes that we produced with Doug Petrovich about his book For the Bible's Greatest Mysteries, online, biblesgreatestmysteries.tv, biblesgreatestmysteries.tv, on his book, Origins of the Hebrews, about the physical evidence for the Hebrew sojourn, the Israelite sojourn in Egypt. You want to go back and watch those. He'll be contributing a presentation. Ryan Pitterson, recent guest on this program, he will also be contributing a presentation. Joel Richardson, best-selling author. Doug Woodward, great lineup, virtual conference so you can binge watch in any order you like, as often as you like for 90 days, defenderconference.com. Then May 19th through 22nd, Sharon and I will be at the Prophecy Watchers Conference in Colorado Springs, the Homeward Bound Conference. This will be another wonderful gathering. Prophecy Watchers always gets the top speakers in the world of Bible prophecy, so we're honored to be among that group. Bill Salas, Gary Stearman, L.A. Marzulli, Bill Koenig, Billy Crone, Tom Hughes, Dr. Tommy Ice, Ryan Pitterson, Josh Peck, Brent Miller Jr., Brent Miller Sr., Doug Woodward. Just a great lineup. prophecywatchers.com, and we hope we can see you in Colorado Springs. prophecywatchers.com, May 19th through 22nd. And then the conference that I think may be the coolest venue for a conference ever, Southwest Radio Church. Our friends there are presenting the Ark Encounter Prophecy Conference because they're holding it at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, the full-sized replica of Noah's Ark. Sharon and I were honored to be there back in 2016 for the grand opening. We covered it for Skywatch TV, along with Josh Peck. And we're going to be back there July 7th through 9th. And we hope you can be there as well. This one, our registration for this conference, only $29.99. And boy, what a cool place. If you haven't been to the Ark Encounter, you should go. And now you've got a great excuse. July 7th through 9th, more information and registration online, SWRC for Southwest Radio Church, swrc.com. Later in July, the Go Therefore Conference. Pastor Mike Spalding pulling this one together. Dr. Mike, along with Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, David Hevner, Pastor Casper McLeod, Coach Dave, Kenny C., Thomas Dunn, Neil Peterson, and Sharon and me. And this will be at the Harvest Revival Center in Brookville, which is just outside Dayton, Ohio, July 29th through 31st. More information on that at gothereforeconference.com, gothereforeconference.com. And this fall, Skywatch TV's tour of Turkey. Sharon and I, joined by Doug Hershey, author of Israel Rising, visiting the cities of the 7 churches of Revelation, Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest religious center. Yeah, Judd was kind of jealous when I mentioned that we were going there this fall. The Asclepion of Pergamum, a healing center devoted to the demigod Asclepius, son of Apollo and a mortal woman, they believed, not really, but this was a real thing. You would go there, you would go down into these areas where you would sleep while snakes crawled all over you, and then when you woke up, whatever dream you had, or more likely a nightmare, you would tell that to the priest of Asclepius, and then they would try to interpret that as to, okay, this is how you're supposed to get healed. The underground city of Derinkuyu, Çatalhöyük, where head shaping was a thing, making your children into cone heads, and Pamukkale, the site of ancient Hierapolis, which is where the Romans venerated or worshipped the god of the underworld, Pluto, the Plutonion. So we will be visiting the gates of hell on this tour. Find out more at skywatchinisrael.com, or skywatchinturkey.com rather, skywatchinturkey.com. That'll be October 18th through November 3rd, and then the Skywatch TV Israel tour next spring, March 19th through 30th. Information and registration at skywatchinisrael.com. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us this evening. As you can see, I'm reached the end of the day, the end of my voice for the day, so we'll call it a wrap here. If you got a spare moment and you can leave us a review, we'd appreciate that, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And, of course, give our Facebook page a like if you would. Our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.